So everything we've been talking about today is asking the question, who is Jesus? And we've had different people get up and talk a little bit about what they like of a story in the Bible that kind of describes who Jesus is. We've sung songs that declare something of who Jesus is. And our verse that we're going to be looking at today, we're going to read it together. And it's from Matthew 16, verses 13 to 16. I'm reading it from my Christian Standard Bible, so if you're following it along, it might be slightly different. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do you say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But you, he asked them, who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And we're going to come back to that verse in a minute, and we're going to talk a little bit about who Jesus is. But before we do that, there's a video that I just want to show you. It's just about 2 minutes long. And this video is somebody asking the question, just going out into the street. It's in America. I think it's in New York. And they're just asking people, who do you think Jesus is? So take a look at the screens, and we're going to watch this video. So it's interesting. You've got all these different people, and that everybody has an opinion about who Jesus is. And obviously the sources of information with which they make their decision are probably different places. And it got me thinking, actually, for us, how do we make a decision about who Jesus is to us? And I think the best place that we look at is actually, who did Jesus say that he was? Because if we have an understanding of who Jesus claimed to be, then it helps us to be able to answer that question for ourselves. Who is Jesus to me? And just for the next few minutes, I just want to talk to you a little bit about who Jesus said he is. You see, there's lots of references in the Bible to things that Jesus said about him. In fact, there's a term, we call it the I ams of Christ, the things where Jesus said, I am this. And I want to read a few to you. I'm not going to read all the Bible references, but these are mainly in John and Revelation. But it says this, I am he. So Jesus is saying, I am the Messiah. He says, I am the bread of life. He says, I am from above. He says, before Abraham was, I am. And that, what he's saying there is he's eternal. He says, I am the light of the world. He says, I am a door of the sheep, a gate in other translations. He says, I'm a good shepherd. He says, I am the Son of God. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. So he's saying, I am teacher and Lord. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus says, I am the true vine. Jesus says, I am he. And what he means by that is all this stuff that you've been reading about of this Messiah that is to come, that's me. Jesus makes bold claims to be the person that is written about throughout the Old Testament, that the Jewish nation were waiting for to be the savior of the world. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. He says, I am the beginning and the end. He says, I am the first and the last. He says, he who lives and was dead. And he says, I am alive forevermore. So throughout just 2 books, he makes some pretty bold claims about who he is. And this is why I have a little bit of an issue with some of the ideas in the video that we showed you. Because for me, I don't think we can claim that Jesus was just a good person, just a good moral teacher. Because I think he takes that out of the equation, and I'm going to explain in a moment why. Because I think he says that he's the Son of God. I want to read to you a little bit from a book, and this is a book called The Truth by J. John. And there's a chapter in here called The Issue of Identity. Who was Jesus? And it says this, who did Jesus think that he was? The sheer quantity and variety of evidence that Jesus considered himself more than a human being is overwhelming. Looked at, it seems impossible to escape the conclusion that Jesus saw himself as being God, that he was God's Son, the Lord, the Son of Man, and the I Am. These claims to deity would be remarkable anywhere. But in the Jewish world, where there was only one God, they are particularly remarkable. There is a story of a modern Jewish scholar who, having looked at length at what Jesus claimed about himself, shook his head and in a moment of utter exasperation said aloud, "Who does this man think he is? God?" And I think, for me, Jesus claimed to be God. And I want to say why I don't think he can be anything less than who he said he was. So humor me for the next few minutes. You see, I think the argument goes like this. Jesus claimed to be God, so either his claims were false or his claims were true. So either he's not God or he is God. You can't have any in between. It's one or the other. So if he wasn't God, if his claims were false, then let's break that down a little bit further. Okay, he knew, if Jesus wasn't God, then maybe he knew it. Maybe he knew he wasn't God, and that would make Jesus a liar. That would mean that he knew he wasn't God, but he was going around trying to con everybody, trying to trick everybody into believing that he was God. But it stands to, in my mind, it kind of stands to reason that there would come a point at which he'd go, "Oh, actually, I'm going to confess I'm not really God." At what length would you go to follow that lie to its end point? Because Jesus, if he was lying, took it to the end point of dying on a cross. At what point, if he was lying and he wasn't really God, at what point would he have said, "Hang on, I'm going to hold my hands up. I really don't want to be crucified. I'm not telling the truth." So I think that it's difficult to say that Jesus was lying because of the extreme measures that he went to. He went through crucifixion. The second thing I think about that is, hang on, just go back one. Second thing that I think about that is he spent most of his life, his ministry, 3.5 years, he spent most of that time being followed around by this group of people called the Pharisees. And they had one mission, and that was to catch him out. Their mission, whenever they followed him around, was to find out what he said, that they could trip him up and prove that he was a liar. And in all of that time, they never successfully managed to trip him up. If he'd been lying, I'm confident that the Pharisees, who were wise in the law, would have found out. But they didn't. They couldn't find anything to suggest that he was lying. Okay, so then the other alternative is this. He didn't know that he wasn't God. Or to put it another way, maybe he was nuts. Maybe he was deluded. Maybe he genuinely thought that he was God. And if that's the case, you can go to the next bit. Yeah, he didn't know it. He was nuts. But actually, I think that the Bible kind of helps us to explain that that's probably not a good option either. Because do you know what? We've got loads of evidence for who Jesus was, both in the Bible and in historical documents. And the accounts of Jesus, the way that he acted, was always someone that was consistent, clear, a good communicator. He was practical, he was consistent, he was calm. Aside from the moment where he got angry and he, made a whip and got people out of the temple, he did not demonstrate the characteristics of sort of somebody who was deluded. So for me, I kind of take this out of the equation because I don't think Jesus acted like somebody who was deluded. So then it kind of leaves me with this alternative. If his claims were false, either he knew it or he didn't, either he was a liar or he's nuts, but I don't think either of them are true. So what's the alternative? The alternative is, actually, do you know what? He claimed to be God. What if what he claimed was true? In which case, the logical conclusion is that Jesus is in fact God, and he is everything that he claimed to be. And this, for me, is what I believe. Because I think the Bible is full of evidence to actually explain that Jesus is who he said he was. But more than just biblical evidence, I also think that my life is filled with examples of Jesus demonstrating who he claimed to be. And I'm sure for all of us in the room that are sat here as Christians, actually, who Jesus is to us is a personal experience. We've had maybe a moment or maybe decades of experiences of Jesus demonstrating that he was God in our own lives through personal testimony of what he has done for us. So if you flick to the next slide, and I'm almost finished. I don't think the Bible leaves room for Jesus to be a good person or just a good moral teacher. Because in my mind, anybody that says, oh, well, he was just a prophet. Well, if he was a prophet, he was a liar and a prophet. Because he said he was God, so if he isn't God, why would I trust him? If he's just a good moral teacher, well, would a good moral teacher actually have mental problems and think he's something he's not? Probably not. But actually, for me, Jesus is God. And that leaves us with one final option, and that is simply this, that we then have a choice. We can either accept that Jesus is who he says he is, at which point we have to make a decision. Okay, so if Jesus is God and he says he's God, and I'm going to accept that Jesus is everything that he declares himself to be in the Bible, then I have to make a decision about whether I accept those claims to be true. And if they are, then I begin a journey of making decisions in my life to live according to the other things that Jesus taught. Or if Jesus is God, I then have the choice of making a decision to reject Jesus, in which case I say, okay, so maybe Jesus is God. Maybe I don't want to listen to him. I don't want to live the life. I'm quite happy with my life. Quite happy doing the things that Jesus says I shouldn't do. I'm quite happy living the way that is against what Jesus has for me. And at which case, we reject him. But there's a decision for us to make. And for me personally, that decision is easy. I believe, who is Jesus to me? I believe that he is the Messiah. I believe that, as it says in this verse, that he is the Son of the living God, that he died, that he was resurrected, and he died for my sins. We can either accept that, we can accept his claims, or we can reject his claims. So who do you say that Jesus is? Is he God? Is he your Savior? Is he the Messiah that he claimed to be?